So yeah, my name's Bernadine, and I am coming a bit more from the traditional art world in terms of working with galleries and museums and the old school people, basically, that hate computers. No, but I think that there's some really interesting philosophical stuff to be thinking about when you're talking about the, I guess, old school art world and digital art. And what my presentation is about is a little bit looking back at how this relationship exists and giving some examples, but also kind of asking some questions about that relationship between the physical art and the digital art. So let me just share my screen and I'll get started. And I'm the type of person, like, please interrupt, write things in the chat, tell me things, because I'd love to hear what you're thinking about, and I'll address those as we are going along. So hopefully you can see my screen now. Can I get some reactions if you're seeing seeing my slides? Let's see. I don't know if it's working.
On my end, it's
I
not.
can't see if I can see. So
I only see your PFP, I think. I don't think I see like
Me neither. I'm not seeing
yeah,
it.
exactly. Weird, because it says that I was sharing and I shared it earlier. Let me try it again. Go live. Hopefully it works this time. And if it doesn't work again, no, still not. Huh.
Maybe log out and back in.
Yeah, I popped out the window from the, what's it called? So let me just try again. That's annoying because it was fine before. All right, I'll be right back. All right, I think it should work now. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
we can also see the screen in the share.
Right. It was some weird popping out the chat into a thing. So anyway, what I'm going to be talking about is exactly museums, digitization, and the NFT economy. And you might see some bit old school NFT concepts. I'm going to be talking a bit about the history and how it's come together, and then my own personal experience in this space as well. So, what's going on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So why is this saying that pause this preview to share your resources? Sorry, give me 1 second to check what's going on because I'm trying to go to the next slide. Can you see the next slide?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Okay, so I've been in the blockchain space for quite a long time. This is a screenshot from a YouTube video that you might also be interested in seeing from 2018. It was at Christie's and it was called the Art and Tech Summit Exploring Blockchain, which I co-organized with Christie's to talk about blockchain after the ICO scandals of 2017, kind of saying, what is the real value of blockchain for the art world, etc. And some really great debates were brought forward there. And we had a panel that was specifically about digital art, including like Masha from Ascribe and Matt from the CryptoPunks and and a few other thought leaders, of course, Jason Bailey, who I think probably has already lectured here. And it was really interesting. It was like before the term NFT even existed. And so I like to think about all of this NFT mania a bit more as art on the blockchain, and then thinking about digital art on the blockchain versus physical art on the blockchain. And then what I'm working on now is an organization called Arcual, which is a private blockchain initiative specifically for physical art that has been set up by some of the industry incumbents. And it's I joined it because I actually do believe that there's a huge importance of bringing the traditional art world into this blockchain space and being more clear in the difference between NFTs that are representing digital art versus NFTs representing physical art and how that interacts with each other. So if you're interested in that, I can tell you a bit more about that. But before that point, I ran my own company for 10 years called Vastari, which was an online platform, Web2 platform, connecting museums and collectors for exhibitions. And it was named after Giorgio Vasari because he was kind of the first art historian that told the lives of the artist in order for people to feel connected with it. And I do think that we have to keep remembering that kind of the art that we remember 500 years later is the art that we understand. And what I particularly loved about Vasari is he didn't just tell stories about the art that was made or how much it sold for or what was paid. Of course, those were some of the stories, but he also told some of the more human stories about the artworks, whether that was that Raphael died while in the throes of passion with the daughter of the baker, La Fornarina, or that Michelangelo was a huge diva and he drew some butts on his paintings because he was angry at people, or that Leonardo was a bit grumpy and disliked people. Like these are the types of stories that he wrote in Italian at the time instead of Latin, and really interacted with the people that then kept these Renaissance artists alive. And we still call the Ninja Turtles after these Renaissance people because of the fact that those popular stories like still touch us today. And so I do think we need to remember that art history is very closely entwined with what art we remember, and just putting it on an immutable ledger is like not the only process of permanence in the art world. So if you think about like the artworks that are getting the headlines today and that are selling for so much money, a lot of them are the artists that Vasari wrote about all that time ago and touched so many people. And another thing that I think sometimes is forgotten in this distributed ledger space when you're talking about art and the blockchain is that we also need to experience these artworks firsthand in order to like bring them to life, not just on a marketplace like OpenSea or object.com, but more in actual experiences to feel the art. And digital artworks and experiences have already existed for a long time, right? I mean, if you look, the image from the left is from an artist collective called Marshmallow Laser Feast that created a digital artwork called We Live in an Ocean of Air, where you had a virtual reality headset that you breathe and you can see your own breath, the carbon dioxide and oxygen of your own breath. And it was like a ticketed experience, but it's an artwork. And how does that make sense today in kind of the world that we live in? So anyway, my old company that I ran for 10 years was relating to exhibitions and museums. And my new company is very much related to creating an immutable ledger for physical artworks. What I think is important to remember is that all of these connections matter a lot in our artworks. That what the object is and who made it. That you can almost think of this as all the different metadata that exists about the artwork, right? And a lot of stuff that's happening on the blockchain at the moment is very focused on those vitals and the provenance. But there are also a lot of other kind of metadata points, if we look at the traditional art world, that affect the perceived value of an artwork. And we should be thinking about that from a digital art point of view as well, and how that's going to evolve over time. So if we look at what museums do in that space, right? So museums are independent organizations that display these artworks, not in order to sell them, but in order to tell the stories and in order to help maintain that relevancy with the public, with people that you know, with all of those interested parties. And so I like to think a little bit about that in the context of this big digital art boom that just happened, because we can't really expect these marketplaces to be museums. And there have been some really interesting initiatives about how digital art can be experienced and how we can, whether it is within your own collection or whether it is something from that you've seen somewhere else, how you can experience that and have more context, I guess. So one thing that I was advising a lot during COVID with the museums that I worked with, we had over 10,000 museums from around the world that were working with Vastari, and a lot of them were approached about doing NFTs, right? And they wanted to get a little bit of context of like, what does this NFT thing mean for us as museums? And this is one of the slides that I was kind of using to explain it to them. So if you think about it, museums traditionally have been physical artworks shown in a physical location. So you'll have a physical artwork, a painting, a sculpture, a installation, whatever, that's shown at a museum somewhere in a city somewhere. Increasingly over time, we've seen digital content being shown in physical spaces, like the Marshmallow Laser Feast piece that I just told you about, or if you think about Team Lab and well, some of these kind of image mapping experiences, or even like well, now what we've seen with the NFT boom with the screens, etc. But I think that the next phase, as software and hardware starts improving, is looking at digital to digital. And I think that there's still, we're kind of at the final frontier in terms of what's going on with the digital to physical space and the digital to digital space. And especially traditional museums have not wrapped their head around the concept that their digital presence is not more than just a pointer to the physical presence, right? So a lot of museums thought of their online website as just the directions to getting to their museum, or a inventory of the works that you could find in the museum. So there's no actual experience on the website. It's just a pointer. And really what we're moving to is that the website, or whatever online presence that museum has, becomes an experience in itself. And that's the same for all kinds of experiences. Often when people talk to me about metaverse and this concept of the metaverse, it's really just about the 3D internet, right? And that we're turning the internet into a place more than just a 2D scrollable environment. That you have three-dimensional interactions, and that you can have things, you can have proximity, you can have more immersive experiences inside of where you're visiting, etc. So there are already some interesting evolutions in this space at the moment. If you look at what's going on with the National Gallery, what they did, they together with Moyosa Media during COVID, they created this like director's choice exhibition. And they were showing images that were captured in 3D scans of works in the collection, and you could walk around them, etc. So this is kind of like that digital twinning type of approach to a digital environment. It very much looks exactly how a museum looks, and the artworks look exactly the same scale as what they would be in a real life. However, you can zoom in much better, right? And you can maybe get closer up than you would in the real world, and you can hang things in a different way than you necessarily would in the real world. Then, as things have been evolving, you've got some ways in which digital is coming to physical environments that you wouldn't expect, or that are slightly different in scale or in absorption. So Cause created an augmented reality experience. This is outside of the Tate Modern in London, that you can basically geographically place artworks in augmented reality. So you start having kind of this digital interacting with the physical quite directly. And that's increasing more and more as exactly the hardware and all of the tools are getting more advanced. I mean, Snapchat is super involved in this type of thing. But also there's some interesting stuff happening with 3D modeling of these artworks that are within the museum collections. If you think about the British Museum, for example, on Sketchfab has made their models available that you can create things, or sometimes they are licensable, sometimes they are open source, that you can basically use these objects in 3D environments. And there are lots of different ways in which people are starting to use these 3D objects from the museum collection in digital environments. And I predict that this is going to happen increasingly, that you start having almost like a digital version of the physical version. But there's kind of a different thing going on with what happened with NFTs, that it's not just this augmented virtual reality space that you're starting to put digital objects into augmented and virtual reality environments, but you have digital items that live in a different type of space, which is a wallet, which is a place where you can publicly showcase what you collect and what you have, and perhaps plug it into an experience like where you can display it in virtual reality environments, but even just interacting with different people on social media, you can then link to your wallet and have all of these curated objects together. So it's more like your cabinet of curiosities, and almost like your wallet is a bit of a personal museum. So I think it's a really interesting thing that we're engaging with. And there's one main issue that I think is important to remember here, which we need to define and we need to start wrapping our head around. And I go back to this image from Magritte, because this is not a pipe and it's not a painting of a pipe. This is a pixelated image of a work that is now on Google Slides being shown on Discord to a bunch of people that is representing a painting of a pipe, right? So we're starting to get into these layers of meaning and what you're actually looking at. And am I, with this pixelated image, representing the painting, or am I representing the JPEG of the painting? What am I actually talking about here? I can't even really read Magritte's signature. So is it really a true how do you say that, representation of the object, or do you think of this as kind of a shortcut of the actual object? I think this starts being quite important as we start looking at editions of works, especially in the NFT space, where we start thinking about, okay, does the fact that, for example, we have an ERC 11155 edition of an NFT piece, are each of those works an independent work? Are they part of a series? Are they a share of a work? We have to start getting more clear on what these works represent, because you can represent these works over and over again infinitely in a digital environment, and we're creating new limitations in how many people can own them, how many people can have them. But what does that mean? Like, what are we actually owning, and what are we actually having in our wallets? I'm seeing that there's some chats. Let me open it up so that I can make sure that I. Yes, exactly. So I saw that there's an article that's being referenced. Foucault is wonderful in this. Does anyone want to say anything about this so far? By the way. No, I'll keep going on my presentation, and we can open it up a little bit more in a second. But so, yeah, as I mentioned, we were kind of talking to museums about, like, should we step into this NFT space? Should we be minting NFTs, etc.? And overall, my main responses to being able to join this NFT phenomenon, or join this thing where you're minting NFTs of physical artworks, is kind of thinking, what does this NFT mean to you? What is it actually that you are minting, right? What are you actually showing with this artwork? So I'm going to go deeper into that kind of meaning. So during COVID, I kept being approached by directors of museums and people within different organizations saying, like, oh, there's so much money out there. We're suffering because we're closed, or we're not having enough people coming through the doors. Can we just get money thrown at us by these kids by minting some NFTs, right? And the truth is, when I was doing the analysis back then, the type of people who were collecting NFTs were not your traditional museum audiences. Like, if you look at who traditionally goes to museums, they're like a little bit more gray, a little bit more retired, a little bit less likely to be reading Reddit. And I think, of course, the onboarding onto a wallet and onto cryptocurrency is one of the main barriers to this. But also, I think that there was also a lack of understanding of what exactly this meant. And I would also be talking to these museums saying, like, there's also very different ways in which you can approach this. So if you're a museum, are you going to be going into this like CryptoKitties, where you're starting to create almost like a game with your artworks and creating like a kind of democratic experience of it? Or are you going to go for the rare experience where you're creating limited editions, and that the artists, the owners and the wallet providers get an access there? And what's kind of the utility of these things that you are creating? And there were all these different comparables back then of what was going on, and people kept thinking about the huge amounts that were being created from all of these things. But the reason that certain things were successful was because they actually, there was like a product market fit. Like there was like they understood what they were doing and brought it to market. So if you look at NBA Top Shot, they took that offline card collecting concept where you bought a pack of cards and you could then use it, and did it in a digital form. When you're looking at CryptoPunks, actually initially they really failed at getting people to buy their CryptoPunks. It was super difficult to get the first 10,000 to be bought. But then what really actually clicked was this kind of community around the rarer pieces, and that you had like a community of ape holders or a community of alien holders, and that then grew. And also, I think with things like autoglyphs, the fact that you actually created a donation had like a certain appeal because it had a different utility. And the fact that it was actually stored on the blockchain, of course, was super important. And then there were some initiatives that were starting to create like NFTs linked to physical, where you had NFC chips or RFID tags sewn onto different places. So My McQueen was an example of that. They created a personal portal if you buy a McQueen piece of fashion, that then you could get access to their personal portal and like be able to do certain things with those tokens. And so we were kind of in the middle of this whole museums are cashing in on NFTs phenomenon. This is actually a screenshot that's been cut off, but basically there was the Uffizi was creating digital replicas of paintings in their collection. But this is where that question starts being of like, what are you actually selling? Because what actually was being sold by the Uffizi was an NFT. Yes, it was also reported that it was an NFT, but it wasn't actually the NFT that the collectors were buying. They were buying a framed screen that had a digital replica of the original painting in exact likeness. So you could get, the screen was custom made to be the size of the original item. And you bought the NFT as you got the NFT as kind of a digital certificate that this was an authentic digital replica. But it's almost like a poster instead of like an original work, because it was just replicating what was already there. Yeah, I was going to run through a whole a few examples of what has been done with NFTs in museums, and kind of tell you a little bit about the problems I guess I saw with some of these. And then one project that I was involved with that also tried to look at these museum NFT phenomenon on the Tezos blockchain in 2021, and then kind of looking a bit more at this. So in March 2021, there was an organization called Global Art Museum that explored taking images that were copyright free. So in theory, you're allowed to do anything you want with them because they're out of, their copyright was expired, and they're in public collections of museums. Mm-hmm. They took them and minted them as NFTs on the Ethereum blockchain. And they created a wallet called the Global Art Museum that had these artworks for sale. And they claimed that a percentage of sales will be donated to the museums where these original artworks were based. But there was huge controversy when this happened, because people said, well, what? You didn't talk to the museum about this. This is, it's not a partnership. It's not been done. And what really was seen as was a certain type of privatization of things that were in the public domain, because these images are open source. They are in the museum collections. The reason that they're copyright free and available digitally online is because of the fact that they are open source. And so by minting NFTs and trying to sell them, you're actually trying to re-privatize open source objects. And this was the main reason that museums got quite upset about this whole scenario. So there was a bit of a controversy in March 2021 in the museum community when it came to NFTs. And so they kind of said that it was a punked experience. Most of the interesting thing about this experiment was that the NFTs didn't sell. They didn't really, no one really, pardon?
Ty čo kosaš se?
Hmm? Oh, I think maybe someone unmuted. I don't know if that was a comment. Okay. So they didn't sell, and I think that most people didn't really see a value in these artworks because they kind of said, well, you don't have the legitimacy to be minting this image, so I don't see any point in buying this image from you. So it actually shows that you're not buying the JPEG, you're buying the provenance and like the verification that that object really came from that wallet and that they have a right to be minting it. And just because you're scraping open source images from the internet doesn't mean that you can mint them and sell them. I think most people in this environment will understand that, but it was quite an epiphany at that time. And there was actually more of a history of museums doing stuff with NFTs even before that point. So there's an academic called Francis Liddell who worked with the National Museums Liverpool to create a project called Crypto Connections, where actually back before the NFT phenomenon, I think it was in 2019, they invited a group of people to come into the museum and mint NFTs based on the collection. So they would use an image from the collection, an open source image from the collection, but the metadata that was minted with that open source image was their personal experience with that object. So they would mint an object and say why they cared about it. And then they put it in their wallet and they left the museum. Those objects still exist today. There were some people that maybe had chose a ring or chose an important something from the collection that they had a specific memory with or something, and they just minted them and kept them. They have never been sold. It's got nothing to do with a commercial value. It's just a memory of why that visitor had a connection with that museum artifact, right? So even the JPEG of the image is more of a reference of the physical object that this memory is related to, but the NFT is actually an NFT of the memory or that connection, which is quite interesting. Then another example of how museums and NFTs connected is that actually, I'm sure many of the people here know that, but the Beeple that sold for that crazy high amount in March 2020, March 2021, was actually meant to, it was 15 years worth of objects that had been published for free online on a blog. And the owners were planning to exhibit it within a museum called B20 that you could only access with certain tokens. So it was kind of this concept of like, a really weird circular way that you like own the images that were in the public domain in order to display them in a private space online in a 3D environment. It's a really interesting new concept of how to do it, but it goes to show that those people spending so much money thought it can't just be that we own it and have it in a crypto wallet. We have to create some kind of a space to experience these objects. So on Vastari, we also had some NFTs that were available for exhibition, and that started happening in 2021. And that's why we were trying to figure out, like, how do these NFTs fit with the physical artworks that are existing in the ecosystem? And then I think that what happened a little bit is that museums started thinking, well, okay, maybe we can do something. So the Hermitage collaborated with Binance to mint Leonardo da Vinci from their collection. They were a little bit more thoughtful about how they minted this. So they did a two of, as you can see, this is an edition of two. One edition stayed in the museum collection, and one was sold on Binance. And the other thing that they did, in order to make it clear, kind of, this is a different thing to the physical work. This is not a JPEG representing the physical work. This is a JPEG representing this current moment in time and what we are doing, is that they signed, the museum director signed the image and dated it so that it would be more clear that this is different from the physical work. This is actually a digital representation of the physical work that will get this. And so it kind of was like acknowledging you're not just buying a share in our Da Vinci, but the fact that people paid so much money for this was quite interesting, right? Because like, what are you seeing as the value in this thing? Is it because of the fact that it has an NFT video airdrop attached to it from the director of the Hermitage, or is it because you get the signature from the director? It was quite an interesting thing, and I think that it hasn't really maintained its value, right? So it was a little bit of that hype scenario, and yeah. So it's interesting that they do have a copy in the Hermitage Museum of the first version of this, and the second one is in private hands. Then you had the British Museum and La Collection working together, and La Collection has continued to do a lot of partnerships with a lot of different museums and cultural institutions. And I think people were a little bit confused when it came to the value of these items when it first started, because, well, it's very interesting in general. So these are images in the public domain by Hokusai. They were prints, so they're not unique items initially anyway, because they are woodcut prints. Coming from Japan, and the British Museum minted different edition sizes and then created different rarities depending on the size of the edition. So if you had an edition of 10,000, the price was lower. If you had an edition of 10, the price was higher. But so as you can see, this one is an edition of 10. It's called super rare, and it's very it's much more coveted than the larger editions. But I always felt like this was more like the postcards that you buy in the museum shop, because you don't have much more in the metadata than the actual image itself, because you're buying an NFT that is not the original medium of the image. You're not adding more to it. You're just buying a representation of it. Now, the only thing that I can see that is a little bit additional value here is the timestamp. This is an NFT that happened during the boom of the NFT space. So the fact that you bought this NFT during 2021, when things were booming in this environment, and you own one of these, I think that they will probably keep a little bit of value. And we've seen this throughout history, right? When photography first started, any photograph was kind of valuable. It was like, oh my gosh, this is one of the first photographs in the world. And those have continued to maintain their value no matter what the subject was of that photograph. But then over time, kind of the artistry of photographs started developing, and also the medium became more accessible, so more people could take photographs. And as a result, today what we consider artist photography is very different from what you do on social media or what you do for commercial reasons. There's a kind of artistry in the medium. So I guess in short, I think that probably these first NFTs that museums started doing perhaps will continue to maintain their value because of the fact that they were so early and they have a timestamp to prove it. But in the long term, as more of these come about, you'll need more than just a JPEG of an image in the collection to maintain these types of prices and this type of value for these artworks. We did a project with the Whitworth, which is a museum in Manchester, called the Ancient of Days NFT, which launched in July 2021. And the Whitworth was quite interesting working with them because they did not want to create this rarity scale. And they also didn't want to have any confusion that they were selling something from their collection, but they wanted to see money from their collection going back to the community. So they created a limited edition work that that was minting a multispectral image from their collection. So, their collection includes an artwork called The Ancient of Days, which is by William Blake. It's this image, but not in this colors. And in order to research it more, because it was an editioned work and it was hand painted by William Blake, and supposedly the version that was in the museum collection of the Whitworth was done on William Blake's deathbed. So it's one of the last works that he created. And so to do research about that, the people within the Whitworth were doing multispectral imaging analysis of the work, which this is actually a screenshot of. So this is a JPEG of the work being in a medical scanner to look at the pigments and figure out what's going on. It's actually quite high res. If you go and look at it on object.com, you'll be able to see. And the museum wanted to jump in. They have an exhibition coming up in this summer called Economics, the Blockbuster, and they wanted to analyze the relationship between economics and the art worlds. And they thought this was an interesting way to do it. All of the money that was made from this project went to local projects. So they have earned so far about $50,000, and they've spent that to help people in Manchester, in the community of the Whitworth, with a lot of different projects that they'll be sharing at some point soon. So it was kind of about this very valuable piece in the Whitworth collection, somehow having it bring back something to the people of Manchester, which was a super interesting idea that they wanted to develop. And so that was one project. Then I was talking earlier about the Uffizi example. This is installed at Unit Gallery in London. You can see these are actually digital screens that have basically replicas of works in Italian museum collections that you can buy, and then you also get an NFT. It looks absolutely stunning, but I think that it's slightly different from buying an NFT on object.com or on Binance's marketplace or anything like that. It's like you're actually buying a replica. And this is not something that's new for museums, right? If you go, for example, the Musée Rodin, so Auguste Rodin, who is like a big sculptor, French sculptor from the 19th century, they create limited edition works of his famous sculptures to sell in the gift shop. And they are so popular that they still have a value today. So it could be that these continue to maintain their value if they're in a limited edition and we go on to further things. But it's just a different type of thing to selling a postcard. And then a lot of museums didn't really engage, but started creating like conversations about NFTs and thinking about whether it was the fad or if it's actually the future of art, etc. Particularly contemporary art museums. We've seen them collecting some NFTs, but a lot of it was just commentary on this NFTs phenomenon. But then also museums were hiring Web3 people in their teams. And it also happened within the auction houses and other large incumbents kind of thinking about it. And I think that there's a lot of interesting places where they could use NFTs. And if you look at the description of this job, they're looking about functional areas, including curatorial, membership, retail, learning and engagement, social media, and technology. It's a lot of different areas where they think Web3 could have an impact. And they haven't quite figured it out yet, right? So that was kind of my presentation about museums and NFTs. I think that I hope that I brought some things to mind that are kind of questions. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about this concept of the physical and digital artworks and how they relate with each other. Because, I think it's still a space where we haven't been very clear. And I was wondering in your own practice, if you already create physical works, how do you relate your physical works with the digital? Do you actually think of them as in the way that kind of, I guess, okay, there are different approaches, right? So it could either be a bit like that you think that the NFT is like a certificate of authenticity for the physical artwork, and the physical artwork is the real work. It could be that you think that the physical artwork is just like a draft for the digital artwork, and actually it's just a drawing that's then going to be animated and created into an artwork. It could be that the physical artwork is irrelevant and the digital artwork is the most important thing. And I think that's kind of the big question, is how do we relate this digital to physical space and then back again. So I've come across artists who don't want their digital works to be shown in a physical space, or have very strict prescriptive ideas about if my work is then going to be shown in a physical space, I want it to not be on a projector, or I don't want it to be on a screen. I want it to be shown in this or that way. And I was wondering how many of you are thinking about this kind of thing.
This is Christian Book here. Thank you for the great presentation. In fact, you've given us lots of great ideas for how to proceed with the exhibition of artworks in these contexts, these museums. I want to note that I actually tried to sell NFTs alongside the physical artwork and promised the physical artwork to the purchaser of the NFT.
Yeah.
Thinking that this was going to be my strategy for selling work, it just seemed to me that it would be appropriate to have the physical object accompany a digital NFT. And I discovered that in many cases, the collectors did not want the physical object. They only wanted the NFT. There was some inconvenience, perhaps, to owning the physical object, that now you became the custodian of something that would be actually a hassle to own, right? That an NFT was actually much more convenient because it's portable, it doesn't take up any space, and actually getting the object to them, they just regarded it as an immense hassle and told me not to send the work, or they didn't care. They would just ignore the opportunity. And it meant that I still have, in some cases, physical objects that I wondered if I'm allowed now to sell them to somebody else who might prefer them. It was a very interesting conundrum. I didn't realize that we are now in a position at this moment where people would actually prefer to have a digital object and not the physical object at all.
I completely agree with you, and I think that's one of the issues as well with museums that are dealing with it. Right? It's like, if they sell NFTs of the work, what implications is that going to have in the future for the actual work, right? Like, will the NFT holders have any rights over what they're going to do with their actual work? And that kind of thing. And I think it's super interesting what you said about the physical and the digital. When the CryptoPunks first came out, they actually offered a physical print with the NFT as kind of a premium option. And I have a few friends who actually bought the physical, like, signed version of the CryptoPunk alongside the NFT, and those are now quite rare. So they're actually quite valuable. But it's like this weird thing that you never know how it's going to be perceived over time. And
what I think I might have learned from this is simply that what Marshall McLuhan noted, that the new technologies, when they're created, they use the old material as their content, and I think I made that kind of mistake here. I just assumed that it would be simply a case of taking the old content, turning it into this new form, and that would be satisfactory, and it's not. And the collectors know it's not. I apologize for interrupting, Danielle.
No, that was exactly right, and I think that it's a weird phenomenon of like, but. So okay, I'll give you an example. I bought a piece that was an NFT, and then the artist actually created a physical work inspired by the NFT, and it was displayed within a museum. And I kind of had two feelings about it. I was kind of like, that's awesome. My NFT is now on display in a museum. I'm super excited about that. But then I also was kind of like, but I own the NFT. Why is this physical work? Oh, and the physical work was then going into the museum collection of the museum. So then, what does my NFT mean if the museum owns a physical version of it? Like, how does that relate to each other? And does it affect the impact, the value of the NFT that I had? Right. So it's like a weird thing to think about.
Sure, absolutely. And I think it's just because there's two economic streams now. I mean, you can trade in the physical object in a manner which is separate completely from the digital object. It has, just two radically different streams of value.
Yeah, completely agreed. And I guess that it's in a similar way. Like, during our Christie's Art and Tech event, we gave away works by Robbie Barrett that were some of the first NFTs minted on Super Rare. And those became these really valuable pieces over time. But you can still buy Robbie's physical work for very normal prices. So, and he actually prefers you to buy his physical works because he's not like the biggest fan of what the NFT system became, right? And so, how is it that there is this parallel value chain depending on the material? It's a very strange thing. But actually, Christian, I just realized that I was already following you, and you're very involved with poetry. And I think that there's a similar thing going on in poetry, right? That there's different values of poetry in different locations or different manifestations. And it's a very interesting thing to think about what it all means together.
Yeah, certainly there's a handful of my peers who are now, I would say, making quite big strides selling poetry in this milieu, whereas in any other kind of publication milieu, it's harder to make a go of being a poet. What's wonderful about the world of NFTs is that many people who could not make a living as a poet now have a better chance of doing so. So certainly some of my peers are proving how this new economy can benefit poets in general. It's wonderful.
Yeah, super interesting. And I really love it because poetry did. There was a great piece in the New York Times recently about the death of poetry, and I was just thinking, like, it's not dead; it's actually just reviving.
When somebody tells me that poetry is about to die, that poetry is dead, my response has been to try to write an unkillable poem. To be honest.
Well, if you put it on a distributed ledger, then it's unkillable, right? You can't die. It won't ever die. The words will stay in the blockchain forever. I just wanted to go to some of the questions that Una was asking. Is that right, Una? Am I saying your name right? Just checking. Yep. Okay. So what are your favorite places to experience art digitally? So I think that, so I have a lot of places I've explored. And it depends on the type of art, is my short answer to it. I can see that if it's a three-dimensional, so okay, I attend a lot of these physical art experiences, and there are a lot of virtual reality artworks that are created and that you experience through a headset. And I always find it really interesting to think about these artworks that wouldn't fit in these virtual reality environments. They don't fit in, how do you say this? Like, you wouldn't be able to have it just within a white virtual box, let's say, a white cube. It's actually an environment itself. It's like an immersive experience. So those, I think you have to experience them by immersing yourself, and almost like you need a portal into another universe. So you need like that entry doorway and then just go into the artwork rather than having it in a space, if that makes sense. The artwork is the space itself. So that's with some digital artworks. And those are the ones that I've actually felt the most with, actually, when I experience them. It's like if you actually immerse yourself in them, it's like a much deeper experience. But in terms of, I guess, 2D digital art, if you want to think of it that way, I'm quite impressed with some of the 3D spaces that are out there. There's a great, so Moyosa creates some great spaces for 2D digital art. Kunst Matrix is a really easy space builder to use that I've used before in the past. But I still think a lot of it has to do with the curator and how the spaces are built and formulated and which artworks are shown next to each other. And then I have to say, you can experience some art even on Instagram, right? Or Twitter, or like that's still a space to discover art. And what I'm really curious about is, given the parent company of Instagram has called itself Meta, are they thinking about turning that experience into a 3D experience? And how will we experience art within those spaces if they become three-dimensional? I've thought about that a lot. Is it going to look like a mall, or is it going to look like a different type of space? What would Instagram look like if it was 3D? I've wondered that a lot. And then how do we push this experimental relationships between physical and digital art to the forefront of conversations about digital art? Interesting. I think we need to start putting some borders and defining some barriers. There's a lot of overlap and how do you say that? Like blurriness between physical and digital. And maybe that's just me, but I think we need to start getting a little bit more structure so that we can understand when we're talking about physical, when we're talking about digital, when we're talking about a share in a work of art, when we're talking about a copy of a work of art, and those types of things. Only once we create that infrastructure will we really be able to grow. And so that's actually part of what my day job is about now, which is it's like a completely parallel blockchain that is only for physical artwork, so that we can actually be clear about. So, for example, Christian, you were talking about your physical artwork versus the NFT. Like, you would mint your physical artwork on Arcual and then have your NFTs existing on the NFT marketplaces, and they can live in parallel, and then you can define the relationship between them. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the with the Arcual blockchain. Is it's a private blockchain that is living in parallel to the public networks, where physical artwork can be registered, and particularly physical artwork to start with that's coming from the traditional gallery environment. So yeah, I can talk about that for hours because it's what I'm working on all the time right now. But I do think that that is important to start creating these definitions. And the other thing that I've been working on for the last 4 years is an initiative called the Art Identification Standard Consortium. That is a cross kind of sector of the art industry, where we're trying. It's a very slow moving lobbying organization, but the concept is to create metadata standards on what is an artwork, what is not an artwork, who can uniquely identify this online, and how do you create this. So a lot of companies that are involved with it are exactly those companies that create RFID tags for works of art, but many of them are also NFT marketplaces and those types of things, and trying to create a cross industry standard to figure it out. And it's been 4 years and we're still in the early stages. It's one of those really slow lobbying bodies, but hopefully over time we can create a protocol that works across the sector. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I do think it's like one of those important things that's happening in parallel. I see a lot of typing.
Hi, Bernadine. Can I jump in?
Yeah, of course.
I appreciate your presentation so much. This is Martha. You gave us so much to think about, and actually the issues, the things that you're talking about are things that I think about a lot, and then I want to brainstorm with people. So I almost want to jump in with some of my ideas about how I've played with these things. There's a project that I'm working on right now that I need to brainstorm with some colleagues about. But anyway, I feel like my work is a generative work. I feel like every one of my pieces, and it's not the generative that we usually think of. I think is an analog generative. Every project that I do is a sketch, and then it becomes I don't want to say represented, but there's a process in which then it becomes it inhabits a different medium, and it becomes a new piece in itself, or it's like embedded or transformed. Well, and so that's one thing that's going on. The other thing is, I think I will just mention one of my projects, and I don't know if it's okay if I touch on something that I'm tackling right now, because you've invited this discussion, and I'm craving feedback and brainstorming, and maybe I don't know if this is.
We need to talk about it. Yeah, 100%. So, do use one of your examples, please. Please tell us about it.
I think I'm just like, you're kind of just going around. So maybe to put it into context, one of my older projects, my background is architecture. So I did a map of Florence in Florence. So the way I created it was by collecting photographs from different people from all over the world. And I did all this. This was a while ago. I don't know, like 15 years ago, through Facebook, really collecting photographs from people of Florence. And then I assembled these photographs into the space. They were located by the exact by the coordinates, and it had something also that had to do with the location of topography and all that. And this thing was created. And to make a long story short, this was also dismantled by the participants. So people that came to the exhibit, when they connected to an image, they took it away. And then in that process, this coordinate was lit up. And at the end, you ended up with a scaffold of like dots lit up that that showed that, I mean, this kind of more abstract version of the city versus the experiential memories of different people. And the one, where maybe there were images that were overlap of the same place because many people photographed the same place, the same way, and some were, anyway, it was this story. So right now I'm working on one. And actually, I think that one reminds me of the National Museum of Liverpool project that you presented, something about it. Yeah. And then right now I'm working on this project. It's the one that I'm trying to execute as part of this. I mean, I'm trying to use this artist residency as a deadline to get it done because I've been thinking about it for a bit. But I have a project where I've been with home being challenged. And having this place where I did this drawing on glass within this space, a very domestic, private space. I created this transparent surface in which I started to juxtapose it against land all over the place and photographing it as reflections of home. And I want to invite this as a collaborative project where I actually mint some of these videos and photographs, because they're videos and photographs of places with this juxtaposed image that is reflected, and it reflects, and have other people collect them, and then I ship them. Some of those translucent templates for them to make their own, and then have that all become then minted also as part of the same project, so that it becomes a project among many of us. And I'm kind of leaving. What? I'm sorry. Whoops. Are you still there? Are we still there? What happened? I heard somebody, Bernadine, was that you? Hello.
Hey, I can hear you. We can hear you.
You can?
Bernadine?
I hear. Oh, I didn't know.
No, we
Were
can
you
hear
with?
you. It's possible that
Okay.
Bernadine got drugged, or there is some kind of a problem here.
Oh, thank you for. Yeah, I sort of paused there because I thought I talked too much, but that's just of it. I
My
mean,
computer suddenly died. I was just about to ask you a question. That's why I unmuted myself, and then the computer died. So I'm so sorry.
no, it's okay. I wasn't sure if I had crashed or what happened.
No, I'm so glad. I've joined from my phone now, so it shouldn't fail anymore. But basically, I think that from what you're saying, the generative part is like kind of sharing these templates that then people can create their own physical works and mint them and have that as a view, which is super interesting, actually. Of like, and how do you? Let me just leave my computer starting up again. But how do you view? So, okay, say someone gets one of your templates and then mints a work. Is the template part of the work, or is it just the minted piece?
It's all part of the work, and it's also the experience in which people connect with this template and then what they do with it. But then, yeah, that's the thing. It exists in physical space. It exists in the space between us. It exists in the memory and the connectivity between us on reflections about home, which I think is a topic that, I don't know, people can address in so many different ways. And it's a trajectory. It's a trajectory well, my own trajectory, but everybody's trajectories and how all of our trajectories connect together. So there is that aspect which is not physical, but it's physical, which is like between places. And then there's the minted piece, because then there's the piece that becomes, I don't know if I want to call it a reference. I'm brainstorming. It's like this is something I've been wanting to discuss with people that can think about these things,
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting there, and I've been talking about that a lot, is that it's only a recent phenomenon that art needs to be owned by someone. If you think about it, a lot of art in the past, maybe it was owned by the church or it was owned by the city, but it wasn't really like a personal possession. And people experienced it and had like mementos from it, whether that was like something that they took with them to remember that experience within that church or whatever it was. But it wasn't that you owned part of the church. And I kind of have been thinking about that a bit with some of this work that we're doing, of like how, I guess that's something you'll have to ask yourself, of like, is it that these pieces of the work are adding up to a bigger piece, or is it that they're taking away their own perspective of the piece and then owning it, their own perspective of the piece somehow? And I guess the question in my mind in terms of how you make that fit with the blockchain is like, is the originating wallet and the owner of that, like in the provenance trail of that NFT, is the originating wallet yours, or is the originating wallet the other person's? Because that's kind of how I define who the owner is. Or is it that you co-own it together? And as a result, like kind of in the way of generative art, like you're minting works into your wallet that kind of come from somewhere else. It's a really interesting question that you can sort of build the blockchain to follow, depending on how you feel about it and where you want to feel that your name continues to be heard.
Yes. I bet those are all the things, thank you, that I think about and want to think about. And then technically I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I do this? But it's interesting to think about not being owned by anyone. But I don't want to take up all the time. I'll think about all this. It's,
but that's what part of these talks. That's why I also left it a bit open. It's going to relate to each of your practices in a different way of like thinking about your own work and how you think about the physical works and the digital works, etc. One interesting point about that on like kind of archiving and thinking about how you document the work. In my current job, I found that a lot of old school art people find it difficult to think of art fitting within a spreadsheet. And when they think about distributed ledger technology and blockchains, they think about art fitting within a spreadsheet. And these structures can be so fluid and so customizable and so different. But often traditional art world people think of it as kind of a formula and a standard that is constraining. And I find it really interesting to think about how we can about that relationship between what's considered the rigid technological structure versus the fluid thing. And like in a like we're all visual people, right? Like in a way, that relationship between the straight lines, horizontal, vertical, etc. of computer engineering and like the binaries that are involved with that and the if this then that formulas versus I guess what some people romantically think of as art production, which is that kind of brush on a canvas and palette knife and fingers going through paint and that kind of thing, which is quite interesting to marry up together. And I think that the more we adjust these digital tools to reflect different realities and different ways of building art, the more people will understand that these there's not one straight formula, and that it actually is very fluid and very able to adjust to different media and different ways of thinking about art. So yeah, it's quite interesting. And I think it's one of the reasons that a lot of the digital art that exploded in 2021 was related to like stuff that had not been appreciated by the general art world before, because they thought, oh, it's built on a computer, it's not really art. And actually, the truth is, a lot of people believe that it is, right? And people are moved by the art that's produced there, and it does mean something to them. So it's different. There was a question in the chat about the private blockchain of Arcual.
Thank you so
No problem, by the way, Martha. And if you want to connect about it directly at some point, please do.
I'd love to. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I think it was Cesar. You were talking about the private blockchain part. So the networks that are being used for NFTs are public networks. So they use cryptocurrency, which is super transparent, and that's what's so amazing about them, right? You can see how many ETH or how many TES were paid for an artwork, and it goes into your wallet and all of that type of thing. Unfortunately, that's one step too far for a lot of the traditional art world. So they feel a little bit uncomfortable with the concept that you'll be able to see transparently what price an artwork sold for, what the splits are between the gallery and the artist, and kind of what the ongoing interest is, and all of those things. The fact that that would be completely public is a little bit uncomfortable for parts of the art world. And so what Arcual is trying to do is build a bit of a bridge that is a middle step where transactions are stored in an immutable fashion. There is a provenance trail, but for example, the price is not transparent. It's still done in fiat currency. And so it's quite an interesting activity, because we're trying to preserve a lot of the Web3 ethics and morals and everything, and also build the technology in a way that follows the standards of public networks, but designing it with privacy at the core. And what that privacy means is that the two parties privy to the transaction, so say, for example, there's a consignment agreement between an artist and a gallery, the artist in the gallery will be able to see that information forever, and it's immutable and it's there. And the agreement they make is enforced by smart contracts. So if a collector buys an artwork, the split will happen automatically on the blockchain as per defined on the smart contract. But third parties are not able to see that money flow, and so it helps a little bit with that transition with the traditional art world that's not comfortable with the completely transparent thing, and also a lot of the entities that are not able to process cryptocurrency yet. So we still do stuff with fiat currency using Stripe, and then facilitate these kind of sales of artworks. Does that make sense, Cesar? Did I make it clearer a little bit?
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
And then the other element that I forgot to mention is that on public networks, anyone can install some software on a server and start running a node. That's what makes it public, right? Like you can mine, anyone can mine Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything, as long as you are willing to invest in that. In a private blockchain network, it's invitation only. So in the company that I'm involved with, we've got servers operated by MCH Group, which is the parent company of Art Basel, Boston Consulting Group, and the Luma Foundation, which is a nonprofit museum in France and Switzerland for contemporary art. And the idea is that it's going to slowly decentralize and allow other art world institutions to run the nodes of the network. And then that, in theory, will mean that the gas fees will also go back to the art world for this specific blockchain. So it's not the crypto miners who will be getting the gas fees for transactions on the Arcual blockchain. It'll be going to art world participants, which is maybe a bit of a different approach. And we can talk a little bit about that if you want, but yeah, that's kind of the concept. So it's still launching now. We're in beta with a test net in terms of the blockchain, and it's we're publishing our white paper in June on how that decentralization strategy is going to work. Cool. I see that Cesar wrote something. All right. Awesome. Yeah. And if you're interested, we're going to keep sharing information. And also, we would love to talk to more artists who are building, who are also in the digital and physical spaces. So there's a colleague of mine called Noelia who's doing demos for artists who might be interested in minting physical artworks to a distributed ledger. So feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in that space. But I think that it wouldn't have been necessary to have something like Arcual if people were willing to buy the physical artwork with an NFT. But clearly that was one thing that just doesn't, it works sometimes, but a lot of the time it doesn't work. And so we have to create these kind of new structures, different definitions of what is what. And in my mind, I guess you could solve some of the problems of the museum NFTs thing if you had a very clear certificate of authenticity that has to do with the artwork in the museum that is not for sale, that is in the museum's wallet and is very clear that it's in the museum's wallet and represents the physical work. And then you have other digital NFTs that are kind of inspired by that work, that link back to that work, but that are not that work. So I think that's kind of where we need to head towards, maybe. But I don't know. We'll see. Did anyone else have any questions or things that they wanted to comment on or discuss or share? Cool. Well, then I think that we can, oh, wait, I see some typing. Danielle. Yes. Well, Danielle, also, you have got a background in museums and archiving and all of that. So this all must like ring true completely for you on how you think about these things.
Yeah, definitely. And like, the physical versus the NFT versus, the pair of them together is just like such a big question generally. And I think one that I'm glad that you're working folks in the traditional art world to try to guide them through this, because it is really tough to get your mind around. And like you said, there are a lot of players in that world that just absolutely, like, the privacy thing is like is a non-starter. If you say, oh, everything has to be transparent, they're just going to walk away. So while we all love the transparency of Web3, I think accommodations are going to need to be made to get certain folks interested in some of this art.
Completely. And I think the interesting thing as well is thinking about like how you can create these bridges, because so far that's where a lot of the kind of hacking and problems arise. So the future is clearly multi-chain, but there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done in making sure that these things are collaborating against each other. And then, looking at things like Club NFT and like thinking about your storage of your artworks, and thinking back to something that Christian said, like taking care of physical artworks has a lot of cost and a lot of work that museums also do. And but you also have similar type of responsibilities if you have NFTs in your wallet, right? So it's kind of an interesting parallel. There might be different quantums of investment, but they are very similar things you have to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I really enjoyed meeting you guys, and I look forward to seeing what kind of work you're making. And I'm going to totally be following the auction that you do in due course. And auction / sale at the end of your residency. And I do have I think it's like hours that you can book to talk about things. If you really are interested, I would love to chat and discuss what you're going through and what you're thinking about. And actually, let me just in the chat put in the email of Noelia, my colleague who's doing the demos, so that you can, if you want to see how Arcual works, you can. It's currently, so part of what we've done in order to make it work for physical art is that it needs 2 counter signatories for a certificate of authenticity to be made. And so our first example is using a gallery and an artist together. So the gallery and the artist together mint the NFT of the artwork to prove that that physical artwork exists, because we wanted to make sure that there wasn't like a whole bunch of artists minting stuff, not in the wrong way, but like that wasn't actually physical works or stuff like that. So it's kind of together with galleries and artists for now. And what we're researching at the moment is how we're going to unlock what we call the artist-led funnel, where artists will be minting their work, but need to have a counter signatory to kind of attest that it exists in a physical world. And that's going to be a really interesting one to research and figure out how to make it work. If you do a demo of the project, you'll probably understand what we're talking about. But yeah, feel free to reach out to Noelia. She's super cool. And yeah, I hope to keep in touch with some of you and keep collecting some of your work as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Bernadine. This was awesome.
I'm glad you liked it. I am always super unsure about whether it'll be interesting to people, this type of stuff that I'm thinking about all the time, but I'm glad that you also think about this all the time. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Really, actually very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Speak soon.